Happy Wednesday. I'm Sal Greco, and you're watching and listening to The Sal Greco Show. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit the like button, hit the share button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button. If you're listening on Rumble, please hit the Rumble button, hit the like button, hit the follow button. If you're listening on any major podcast streaming platforms, please like, share, and subscribe. Today, we're going to hit a few topics, but mostly it's going to be about the corruption that is never ending in the New York City Police Department, something that we discussed in the prior episode with Marlon Bethel. There's a part 2 to this. And then there's another scandal that's brewing that has everything to do with nepotism and cronyism in the New York City Police Department. Plus, New York City Mayor Eric Adams emerges. He emerged. He was in Albany. I don't think that went too well. And there's more coming in his current case. All of that and much more coming up on the Sal Greco Show. So on the prior edition of the Sal Greco Show, we had Marlon Bethel on. Marlon Bethel, of course, is a retired NYPD detective who is part of the Finest Unfiltered family. And he likes to come on from time to time, whether it be this show or the Finest Unfiltered. And he brings analytics, he brings facts, he brings his own views, which are pretty much in line with my own views, because he, exposes a lot of corruption in the New York City Police Department. He is running numbers and overtime. It's just crazy, the stuff that he's come up with. But last time on the Sal Greco Show, we showed you a story in regards to an individual that was harassed and beaten by corrupt cops, in my opinion, in the 46th precinct. And I'm going to show you the entire segment, so you will once again hear the article, read the article, which is basically a press release from the plaintiff's lawyer, and then some of what me and Marlon discussed, and we'll come right back here because there's more to that story. Just like I had stated on the previous episode, that we will follow this story wherever it leads, because it is very bad for the New York City Police Department to have rogue cops like this running around. So let me play this for you, and we'll come right back. Once again, I'm not going to pull any punches. This is Eric Sanders, who's my attorney, happens to also be Lieutenant Epps' attorney, and now he's representing this gentleman. Handcuffed and punched, NYPD officers face legal action after fracturing Bronx man's jaw and brutal false arrest. For immediate release. Civil rights violations highlight ongoing pattern of police brutality and discrimination in New York City. February 1st, 2025, the Sanders firm has filed a formal legal complaint against the New York City Police Department on behalf of Jalen Ryan, a 21-year-old Bronx resident who was falsely arrested, physically assaulted, and subjected to racial profiling by NYPD officers on December 28, 2024. The legal claim filed with the New York City Comptroller's Office seeks compensatory punitive damages for false arrest, excessive force, racial discrimination, failure to intervene, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The incident, which unfolded in the early morning hours in the Bronx, underscores ongoing civil rights violations by the NYPD, adding to the growing list of cases involving racialized police brutality and unconstitutional policing practices. Incident overview. NYPD officers allegedly assault and falsely arrest innocent man. At approximately 12:25 a.m. on December 28, 2024, Mr. Ryan stood lawfully next to his mother's 2017 Mercedes-Benz GLS SUV near 187th Street, near 187 East 188th Street in the Bronx, ensuring that a female friend, Caroline Martinez, entered her apartment safely. The area is known for high crime rates, and Mr. Ryan was exercising reasonable caution. Without provocation or reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, a group of uniformed NYPD officers led by Sergeant Brian B. Mahone Shield number 4797, tax registry number 9555166 aggressively approached Mr. Ryan and demanded identification. Before this incident, Mr. Ryan had never been arrested and had no criminal record, making the officer's actions even more egregious and unjustified. When Mr. Ryan inquired why he was being stopped, the situation quickly escalated into an unjustified use of force. According to the legal claim, multiple officers grabbed Mr. Ryan, threw him violently against his vehicle, and forcibly handcuffed him without explanation while Mr. Ryan was already restrained. Police officer Joel K. Ayala, shield number 4081, tax registry number 954509, delivered a closed fist punch to the right side of Mr. Ryan's face, causing significant pain and trauma. Mr. Ryan was transported in Sergeant Mahone's vehicle to the 46th precinct, where officers fabricated a disorderly conduct charge. During transport, Mahone allegedly taunted Mr. Ryan, stating, "This is what happens if you do not give the police what they ask for. You'll get punched in the face." Explicit racial profiling and retaliatory ticketing. Upon arrival at the 46th precinct, Mr. Ryan repeatedly requested medical assistance, complaining of pain and dizziness from the punch. Officers delayed treatment and actively discouraged emergency medical technicians, EMTs, from evaluating him properly, further exasperating the harm. When Mr. Ryan's mother, Nazima Royster, arrived at the precinct, she confronted Sergeant Mahone about her son's injuries. Mahone allegedly responded, "When you do not follow protocol, this is what happens. You get punched in your face." In a stunning admission of racial bias, Mahone further justified the officer's actions by stating, "He's a black kid driving a Mercedes-Benz and the windows are all tinted. Vehicles like that, police, search for drugs and guns." After spending several hours in police custody, Mr. Ryan was released with 3 summonses, including disorderly conduct, issued without probable cause; double parking violation, issued after the arrest; parking near a fire hydrant, issued after the arrest. These tickets issued after the incident appear to be retaliatory and an attempt to justify an otherwise unlawful arrest. On January 16, 2025, upon review by a Bronx criminal court judge, the disorderly conduct charge was immediately dismissed. And it's right here on the screen. And notice here in the story here, it says, at TPO, defendant refused lawful order to provide driver's license. Defendant stated he had a license but was not going to present it to officers. That is a very sad story to put in there. That's the Ryan summons. The dismissal is right here. There's a record of it right here from the court. They dismissed this immediately. So that's a whole nother story with this. So this article continues. Pattern of NYPD misconduct and similar cases of civil rights violations. The NYPD has a long documented history of excessive force, racial profiling, unconstitutional policing, particularly in communities of color. Mr. Ryan's case is not an isolated incident, but rather part of a systemic problem that has resulted in wrongful deaths, excessive force incidents, and legal settlements costing taxpayers millions of dollars. Notable similar cases include Eric Garner, 2014, died after NYPD officer Daniel Pantaleo placed him in a prohibited chokehold while arresting him for allegedly selling loose cigarettes. His final words, "I can't breathe," became a national rallying cry against police brutality. Delron Small, 2016, shot and killed by an off-duty NYPD officer during a road rage incident. Video of evidence contradicted the officer's self-defense claims, yet no conviction followed. Kowalski Treywick, 2019, shot and killed inside his apartment after NYPD officers entered without cause, escalated a non-threatening situation to a fatal counter. Dauna Zayar, hope they didn't mess that name up, knocked to the ground by an NYPD officer during the George Floyd protest, resulting in severe head trauma. Legal violations in Mr. Ryan's case. The legal claim against the NYPD alleges multiple constitutional and civil rights violations, including false arrest, no probable cause existed for Mr. Ryan's detention, excessive force, the use of violent physical assault against a restrained individual violates NYPD policy in the Fourth Amendment, racial discrimination. Sergeant Mahone's explicit racial statements prove biased. It is bias-based policing and violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Fair to intervene. Multiple officers witnessed the incident and failed to prevent or report misconduct, making them equally liable. Negligence and medical misconduct. The denial and delay of medical attention violate NYPD protocol and fundamental human rights. 6, retaliation and fabricated charges. Issuing unjustified tickets after the arrest constitutes abuse of authority and attempt to cover up misconduct. Call for action and systemic reform. This is from Eric Sanders. This case exemplifies the deeply entrenched systematic failures within the NYPD, where excessive force, racial profiling, and unlawful detentions persist without consequence. Mr. Ryan was unlawfully assaulted, humiliated, and deprived of his constitutional rights for no reason other than being a young black man in his own community. This legal action is not just about seeking justice for Mr. Ryan, but about holding law enforcement accountable and demanding real systemic change. The officers involved in this egregious misconduct must face the full weight of the law. Their actions warrant immediate termination, suspension, and criminal prosecution. We call upon the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York and the Bronx County District Attorney's Office to conduct a thorough investigation and bring criminal charges against these officers to ensure that no individual is above the law, including these entrusted to uphold it. Marlon, I want to get your thoughts on that before I pull up the two individuals' 50A. Remember, we were going to discuss the 50A. Well, we're going to show you their 50A. So, Marlon, what do you think about reading all of that and seeing that?
Yeah, I was saying there's a lot of issues that underline this incident, right? The first thing is tunnel vision. John talks, now I was never a supervisor, right? But I can tell you from the other side as a cop who's gotten tunnel vision before in incidents, that this is why you need a good boss next to you who should kind of separate himself from what you're doing. Let you be the cop and he be the boss. The reason I say this is because as a cop, you know, especially as an active cop, you get in this mind frame when it's on, it's like hard to turn off until that guy's in cuffs. You know what I mean? So you need a boss who's there, who's going to be ready to pull you out of your tunnel vision if you're going too far, right? John always says that you need a boss to protect you from yourself. And this is where that comes in. By protecting you from yourself, meaning he's there to pull you out of your tunnel vision if you get to a point where you might be crossing, you might be ready to cross that line, you know? The other issue here, and I made a tweet about it, right? I said yesterday that looking at the bigger picture, right? Incidents like this are usually the byproduct of command level pressure cascading from 1 PP down to the precincts and down to the specific units. And the pressure is to beat your prior numbers or to exceed them. Oh, well, to exceed them or at least match them, right? Now, this pressure is often faced by a lot of active and high performance, like violence suppression units, you know? If you're at FIO, there's constant pressure to beat your last year's search warrant number, you know? If you're in one of these gun units, there's constant pressure to get more guns than last year. You know, same thing for narco. Everybody has pressure, and that pressure comes on down and floats to you. And one of the problems is that in a case like this, you have pressure coming from the top, and that young man has pressure coming from the media and the progressive media and its associates, which include some of these wacky politicians we have in the New York City and New York State and other progressive states, right? That pressure is to assume to be confrontational with every police encounter, right? And that needlessly escalates the situation. And that often escalates into the situation going sideways, right? And now there might be things missing that we don't know yet, but we know for a fact that a summons was involved and that the plaintiff was injured here, right? So my question was also in that tweet, why, if you have to punch somebody in the face, they're going through. Otherwise, why did you punch them in the face? Why did you use force at that level, right? If they're not in cuffs, right? So there's a lot of issues playing here. And, you know, one more thing. In the prior segment, we talked about how the different roles in law enforcement, the different people at the top have to do their job. Well, in this case, that problem trickles down to the bottom too, on the street. And supervisors, you got to do your job too. You know, you got to do your job, which is to protect the cops from themselves, pull them out of situation, and to prevent that situation. Your main job, right, is to prevent that situation from going sideways, right? And now I think this is hard sometimes for a lot of cops who were active cops, and now they become supervisors. Because in their heads, they still want to get out there and they still want to be, the guy that slaps his cuffs on a perp. But the problem is, you're the boss now. And you're going to still have a chance to do that. But your priority should be to make sure your guys don't get lost in that, as they're trying to slap cuffs on the perp, So to be ready to whoa, step back. Let's, put some other guy to deal with the perp, or you talk to the perp. But basically, you have to protect cops from themselves sometimes, like John said. So that's what I'm thinking happened here. And like I said, I'm sure more is going to come out. But we talked that we talk about how everything is related here, right? And you dig through this and you can see how the threads eventually merge with this and it creates a stew that leads to bad incidents, and unless we stop this, more incidents like this are going to come, because that pressure is coming from multiple places and it collides, and the results are incidents that go sideways, and it's no good for everybody. It's not good for us, not good for the communities. That's what I'm thinking about this one now.
So I'm thinking about the quality of life, Chief, that's coming out now, because that's going to put a ton of pressure on the So actually, I want to go back before I put the 58 up for you to see. First of all, if you detain somebody, you do strike them in the face. That's going to be that field force report. We don't know if that was done. An ambulance must be called for somebody who's got punched in the face. I believe he broke his jaw. And you don't issue summonses after the arrest and another summons that you issue. So at this point, right here, you already have, and the supervisor on the desk that allowed all of this is another issue. So again, the desk officer's on the hook. This sergeant's definitely on the hook more than anyone else. And the cop and whoever else was there that should have intervened, because you don't issue a summons for this. You can't take someone to the precinct and issue. Those days are over. I don't know if you actually read the patrol guide. You can't do that. So what was done here is you're already lost. You're behind an 8 ball. But then the continuation of, well, you're in the cell. So what we're going to do is you're under arrest, but you're not under arrest because we're just going to give you a summons. And then after a fact, give you a couple other summonses. That stuff doesn't fly anymore. That may have been like 20 years ago, maybe in our day when we first started, but that stuff stopped. So when you make an arrest, those things you're saying he did have to be charges on an online booking sheet. Also, there should have been what's that when they make the arrest and then they avoided arrest.
Yes.
Because you issued a summons instead of putting them through the system. And I'm almost positive that wasn't done here because we know how precincts operate. So there's a ton of protocols that were not taken here. And this is a huge miscarriage of justice. And I would love to see this body camera and exactly what was being said, not only between the sergeant and the officer, but what was said between the sergeant and the defendant, and also the others, the police officer and the defendant, and them with each other. What was said there, because this stinks. But now I'm going to show you the 58. We'll go one by one because there's only 2 of them. Joel K. Ayala, we see here. Now it says now he's a sergeant and then in the 46th precinct. He's a sergeant there. Look at his record. Substantiate allegations. He had a discipline case. We won't know. Even if you click on it, it won't. His name in a lawsuit. Okay. So it's a lawsuit. Command discipline. Look at this lawsuit settlement. Look at that. Look at that list. And then there's the complaints. Now, this usually doesn't judge someone when, look, 18 complaints, 58 allegations, 18 substantiated. So that's this Joel Ayala. Now we're going to go to the Brian Mahone, who instigated the whole thing. He was the first officer of contact, we'll say. And here's Brian Mahone there. He also it says how much he made, too. See substantial allegations, but here's what I really want, and got a lot of discipline cases. The main thing right here, credibility. Brian Mahone appears on the adverse credibility list of officers with potential credibility problems. And then, of course, there's a slew of lawsuit settlements, could be good or bad, depends how you look at it with someone. He's also in a few articles, but here's the main one here. Complaints. 12 complaints, 40 allegations, 13 substantiated. And, Marlon, you see this disciplinary record, you see the actions. What are your thoughts on seeing that?
Well, first of all, that shows you what role the importance of the 58, because you'll never find out about that adverse credibility list had it not been for the 58. We would never have known that John Shell is actually on that list too. But you'd never know without 58. But a lot of active cops have, good or bad, have a lot of lawsuits. So we know that's a fact. But this shows you why it's important for the sergeant to save cops from themselves. Your guy's a hard charger, good or bad. You got to be on your P's and Q's. Got to make sure this guy doesn't cross the line. You got to tell him, like, dude, step back, let give it some time, step back, save him from that tunnel vision that he might have. He might be a go-getter and a hard charger, and which is good, but you got to know when to pull back and save him from himself, before he crosses that line, right? But this it goes back to what we said. We need people to do their jobs. If everyone in the department does their job, then we get to a better, more efficient, more transparent, more honest department, right? But there's just so many questions that we have for this incident that it's like, how did it even get that far? Yeah. Now, another thing about that adverse credibility list, right? That was one of the reasons why I made my tweet, because I know a couple guys who are on that list, and some of them are great cops. These guys could sniff a gun out just by walking outside a precinct, right? But what ends up happening is there's so much pressure from above that they're quick to react sometimes too quick, sometimes when they should be hanging back and just observing a little bit more, because they're so good at it sometimes that it pushes their instinct to react a lot faster than they should. And a lot of times that pressure to meet or exceed your past numbers pushes them to be overly aggressive. And I believe that has a part to play in it, right? That right now, we know the Bronx has been on fire right now, right? And the administration is getting a lot of pressure and a lot of pushback as to why this keeps happening. We know that the issue extends beyond just the cops doing their work, because the DAs aren't doing their job and the city isn't pushing the DAs to do their job as well. But one of the problems that happens, like I said, is that pressure goes down to the cops on the street and it pushes them to be overly aggressive too fast when they should, like, hang back a little bit. Let's observe a little bit. Let's, don't react so quickly, is what I'm saying, So this is what I'm thinking of this incident, and I'm sure it's going to become a bigger deal as we get closer to proceedings and as the body cam comes out and all that. But I think it's not going to be a good look, and these incidents don't help with our perception in the community. It just makes the job harder for the next guy who's just trying to do his job and trying to get the next gun off the street, This is something that the job needs to honestly look at itself and, like, I get the pressure to beat your numbers, and a lot of this comes from ourselves too, because when I was in the FIO's office, like, I felt it too. We got to get this gun. Last month we got 3. We got to get this. We got to hit this door, But you got to realize some point. There comes a point where it's like, slow down. Let's not, just because we want to do this job, let's not get ourselves in trouble, because the tide is against us, unfortunately. The tide is against us, and they're waiting on us to make one mistake to throw us in jail. When you're an active cop, especially in these heavy units, you're one incident away from going to jail. So you'd better be on your P's and Q's, and you better, take a measured response to a lot of these things.
When it came to this incident, it seems that there was no accountability from any supervisor here. That seems to be a glaring fact, and there's definitely missteps in the protocols. There's also no reasonable call. Like, what is the suspicion? What is the reasonable suspicion of any of this? What the guy was standing there, and then the summons is issued after everything here was done wrongfully. That's the best way for me to describe it. Short of you saying, "Hi, how are you, sir?" None of this makes sense. I look forward to, hearing more details about this. This already sounds disgusting, and I know Eric Sanders doesn't take cases if they aren't legit. It's got to be something legit with evidence, and what you saw already was bad enough. I don't know what to say. I think other than there'll be more to come, and we'll be covering that on the Finest Unfiltered and the Sal Greco Show in regards to this incident. But this is what we mean. We back all the rank and file in the police department, but this is the problem, is when there's one or two bad apples, you need to root them out, because this can definitely poison the entire well of the tree. And if it was some chief that comes down with directives, that needs to come out too, because you know what? We're tired of hearing the double talk where, oh, it's got to be nice community policing, and then meanwhile, you might have a chief, John Shell or otherwise, that state, nah, we got to go and brutalize people, because that's what I did in my day 35 years ago. That's what you're going to do today, because I bear no responsibility. I'm sitting on One Police Plaza hanging out with Dr. Phil and whoever else it is that they hang around with. So now the story you just heard is bad. It's bad for the police department, and me and Marlon are in lockstep over what happened. That it's like you can't have people like this in the New York City Police Department representing the police department, especially. It just doesn't represent the department and all the good officers that just go to work and do their job, right? So let's show you once again the two central figures in this, which is Joel Ayala, a sergeant, and another sergeant, Brian Mahone. So let's pull up Joel Ayala's 50A once again. So here's Joel Ayala's 50A. You see that he's a sergeant in the 46th precinct. He also worked in the 52nd precinct, and he worked in Gun Violence Suppression Division, Patrol Borough Bronx. But he's got a litany of problems. Look at his substantiated allegations. Look at the lawsuit settlements. Look at the complaints. All right, there's pending litigation. It's a mess. All right. Now, 50A, look, just because you have lawsuits and allegations doesn't make you a bad officer. It doesn't make you, the world's worst human being. But it is troubling to see patterns developing. And one thing that I have learned is that Joel Ayala allegedly is the brother of Joe Ayala, the guy who runs the Hispanic Society and is good friends with a mob associate and self-admitted criminal that used to run a nightclub. I guess he was the creator of the place. He's the manager of the place, Conza Frito. So with that association in mind, remember Joe Ayala, who's part of Hispanic Society, who's now fallen under another investigation where they were allegedly all fraternals are being looked at for play promotions and other things, and also involves that restaurant. He worked with this Sergeant Mahone when they were cops. So the Sergeant, Brian Mahone, that's also in this incident, we're going to show you something here. So let me pull up his 50A again. Here's Brian Mahone's 58. Remember, he served in the 52nd precinct. So he worked with Ayala as a cop as well. So they know each other. May or not, may be bad, may be good. And you can see all the substantiated allegations here. He also appears on the adverse credibility list. He's got a slew of discipline cases. He's got a slew of lawsuits. He's in articles. He's in, plenty of complaints, as you could tell. But there's one in particular, and I just scrolled by it, that really sticks out to me. So there was an incident with Brian where he received a year probation, dismissal probation, and 40 vacation days. This incident alone, normally any officer or anyone else that's in the New York State Police Department would have been terminated. And there's people that have been terminated for far less. So here's a letter from the Civilian Complaint Review Board. Not a fan of these people. And it was to the police commissioner at the time, the Honorable Edward Caban. I don't know about honorable. And it's a report on the Administrative Prosecution Unit, the second quarter of 2023. And this is basically, they're writing here, the report will address the following matters: trial verdicts issued by an Assistant Deputy Commissioner of Trials, the treatment of administrative prosecution, pleas by the Police Commissioner, the retention of cases under Provision 2 of April 2nd, 2020, Memorandum of Understanding, cases administratively closed by the Police Commissioner, cases closed due to the statute of limitations, the size of APU's docket, the time to serve charges and specifications on respondents, and the discipline concurrence rate. The report contains information concerning the following cases: the closures in the second quarter of 2023, 12 trial verdicts, 17 pleas, 3 retained cases, 9 police commissioner administratively closed cases, 46 APU administratively closed cases. Finally, it includes information regarding the discipline and concurrence rates for the quarter, which stand at 65%, 61%, respectively. We hope that the police commissioner will reduce the amount of retained cases so that they have a full opportunity to be put before the tribunal. Thank you for your consideration. Sincerely, Jonathan Darch, the executive director of, I believe, the director of CCRB. There you see Amy Litwin, who was the advocate, the department advocate in the NYPD. Deputy Commissioner Rosemary Maldonado, I believe she might be still there or she left. And here it goes, trial. So you're seeing here, at the conclusion of an administrative trial, the preceding ADCT renders a finding of guilty or not guilty on each of the charges and specification against the members of service. For guilty verdicts, the ADCT recommends a penalty for each member of service involved in the case, and the police commissioner either approves, modifies, or reverses the verdict and recommends a penalty. There is no penalty recommendation for not guilty verdicts. In the second quarter of 2023, the verdicts for 12 APU trials were finalized. The verdicts can be found below. So, look, here's a guy that the APU recommended termination, but he only got 5 days vacation forfeiture. And the police commissioner approved this and did not modify the penalty. Odd. But we're going to keep going. I mean, there's another one, P.O. Schumacher. Again, 5 days vacation, the police commissioner modified the penalty to 5 days in training. Remember, the police commissioner can do what he wants, but you could tell, I mean, this is all like, offensive language and all this stuff, Fado. Same thing with these guys here. Abuse of authority, this stuff could go either way. I would say, it could be bad. It could be, I don't know if it's made up. People getting hit in the face, all this other stuff, discourtesy. We're going to get, there's 1.1 out here. Physical force used against victim 1. Untruthful statement, providing a misleading official statement to CCRB. 25 vacation days forfeiture. And they only lost 3 days. The police commissioner approved the guilty verdict and modified the penalty to 5 days. From 25 to 5. I thought misleading statements was an automatic termination. Here, here's Inspector Jesse Lance. Force struck victim 2 with a nightstick. Asper baton. Used physical force against victim 2. Untruthful statement. Providing a misleading official statement to the CCRB. 30 days vacation forfeiture and 1 year dismissal probation. ADCT rendered not guilty verdict on all charges. The police commissioner approved the not guilty verdict. This inspector provided a misleading statement. Why wasn't he terminated? I thought that's in the disciplinary matrix. We don't know why they're varying off of this. Now, in lieu of a trial, the officer can reach a plea agreement with the APU. This agreement must be approved by both an ADCT and the police commissioner. The APU uses several factors to determine plea recommendations, including but not limited to MOS length of service, MOS rank, MOS disciplinary history, the facts of the case, the strength of the case, vulnerability of the victim, the extent of any injury, the number of complaints, precedent from cases involving analogs, charges, and delineated penalty categories from the New York City Police Department NYPD disciplinary matrix. In the second quarter of 2023, the APU finalized 17 plea agreements. So, you see all of this stuff. Jonathan Rivera. So the police commission is disapproving of this stuff. Once again, it's the police commissioners, whatever they want to do. But of course, here's the one I'm going to highlight. Brian Mahone. Same Brian Mahone in this situation that struck this individual in the face in the story that we're covering here. So here he is, struck the victim with a baton, used physical force against an individual, used physical force against the victim, discourtesy, spoke discourteously to the victim, and then untruthful statement, provided a false official statement to the CCRB. Officer accepted 1 year dismissal probation and 40 days vacation forfeiture. The police commissioner approved the plea and did not modify the penalty. Now, when you look at this, there are people on there like you saw, and as we know, misleading statements in the disciplinary matrix is termination. Whether you do it to internal affairs at an internal interview, when you're getting interviewed by internal affairs or some other investigative agency, whether it be inspections or something like that, or DA's office, which would be perjury, or the Department of Investigation, it's usually misleading statements is a termination offense. But here we're seeing a deviation. And it's a deviation under the former police commissioner, Ed Caban, who is shrouded in mystery himself because his brother's own this nightclub and there's all kinds of mishigas going on with him. And there's a whole bunch of mishigas going on there with Ed Caban and what happened in the nightclub with his brother and his other brothers allegedly extorting people. So, and his own corruption, Ed Caban. So we have that going on. And then we have what he does in his official role as police commissioner. And then I'm going to point to another thing we found out, which is the actual charges. And you can see for yourself, Caban signed off on this, as well as the former police commissioner, Keyshawn Sewell. She herself who terminated me, saying she doesn't like who my friends are that has nothing to do with this police department, nor are they a criminal or involved in criminal activity. So let me show you this document. All right, so this is a disposition of charges, okay? It says right here, when you get charged, and this is what he pled guilty to. He was assigned to narcotics in the Bronx. He was on duty in the vicinity of East 14th Street and 5th Avenue, Manhattan, and he wrongfully used force and struck whoever it was with a baton in the arm without police necessity. And he pled guilty to this. He also pled guilty to wrongfully using force and that he, with a baton, I guess, struck someone in the back without police necessity. He also wrongfully used force, and that he used physical force against an individual without police necessity. He wrongfully used the force that he pushed someone, whoever the victim is, without police necessity. And he also provided misleading statements to the CCRB. And this is signed by the first deputy commissioner in 2/15/2023, it looks like. And the police commissioner 4/21/2023. And then here are all the endorsements. Here, yes, Ed Caban was the first deputy commissioner, signed off on this, recommended approval. Ed Caban approved April 21st, 2023. Keyshawn Sewell approves it. So, and here's the Civilian Complaint Review Board. The executive director signed off on this. Paul Gamble was in the trial room. He approved the negotiated penalty of forfeiture, 40 vacation days and 1 year dismissal probation. I'm not an anti-cop guy. I'm pro-law enforcement. I don't like corrupt actors inside the police department. And I don't like how certain police departments are run because they're run corruptly. Right here, we have a situation where there's Brian Mahone, who also allegedly was also involved in the unfortunate shooting of Officer Brian Mulkeen. Remember him? That was in 2019. So, unfortunately, an officer lost his life in a shooting. That in itself was an issue because the city had to pay out. In that civil case, they didn't find any criminal, aspects of that or how that went down. But again, he was in the middle of that, and he's in the middle of this. The problem here is with the misleading statements, the prior history, and he's also on the adverse credibility list. Brian Mahone is a liability to the police department. And in certain retrospects, so is Ayala there, his buddy. And they went ahead, and what they did to this individual is beyond egregious. And this is where 50A is very important, because the New York City Police Department in the past, in any kind of litigation, would have said that these records they can't give to you. They don't want to show any discipline or the fact that maybe they blew it and they should have terminated people who then go on and do even more egregious acts. And then who's responsible? But because of 50A, we can now hold corrupt actors accountable, whether it be rogue cops, their supervisors, or more than likely the upper echelon of the police department who condone this stuff. Now, you ask, why is Brian Mahone still employed? And that's a good question, because who is it that is shielding this individual from being terminated, from being thrown off the job for prior instances, for being involved in all these other incidents that definitely misleading statements, and, that is a termination. Yet they said Sal Greco gave a misleading statement because I wasn't admitting to being uncompensated security, whatever the hell that means. So therefore I had to be terminated. But yet this guy beating people with a knife stick, baton, whatever it is he had in his hands, and then it pleads guilty to it, and he gave a misleading statement, which is termination. But the illustrious police commissioner, well, he was the first deputy commissioner at the time, Eddie Caban, and then Keyshawn Sewell, who was a police commissioner in my own case, thinks that's just, give him 40 vacation days a year, dismissal probation. And while this is going on, early on in 2024, John McCarry and Eric Dim were online, and allegedly it was the same Mr. Mahone that was on there sending messages or browbeating them or whatever it is. It's harassment while under probation. That should be added on to the deciding factors here, whether this individual should be in the New York City Police Department. This incident stinks. I told you that whatever it is that comes down the pike, we are going to show it on the show because these are the bad actors that give a bad name to the NYPD. And it all goes around in a circle. That's what it seems. It's always going back to the same circle. So there'll be more to come, and we'll be covering that on the Sal Greco Show. To be continued. So on to the next topic. Speaking of 50A, and speaking of the cronyism and the nepotism in the NYPD, there was another incident. And I will pull up the 50A and the officer that's no longer employed by the New York City Police Department. And I like to point this story out because this is another egregious misstep by the upper echelon in the New York City Police Department. This is Detective George H. Moore. Now, this detective, at one time, well, not anymore, he was in the New York City Police Department. And he was a detective. And he was in warrants, as you could tell. Of course, the lawsuits are enormous. That is an enormous amount given. But look, 4 complaints, 7 allegations. That's not that bad. But there is an article, right? What's that article? NYPD detective pleads guilty to drunken crash that injured 2. This is by Jerry Barmash. It was November 13, 2024. And it goes as follows. NYPD detective pleads guilty to drunken crash that injured 2. DA. George Moore was driving aggressively when he crashed his vehicle on the Meadowbrook Parkway last year, prosecutors said. Mineola, New York. An NYPD detective pled guilty to an aggravated vehicular assault for a drunken driving crash on the Meadowbrook Parkway last year, prosecutors said. George Moore, 40, also pled guilty to second-degree assault, third-degree assault, and aggravated driving while intoxicated, Nassau County District Attorney Ann Donnelly said. On August 4, 2023, Moore was driving with a female passenger in a 2014 Mercedes northbound on the Meadowbrook Parkway while on his way to work in Queens, prosecutors said. Moore was drunk and driving aggressively when he crashed into a 2014 Jeep Grand Cherokee in the center lane of the parkway, Donnelly said. The force of the impact caused Moore's car to crash into the center divider of the Meadowbrook and then head on into a tree on the right shoulder before coming to a rest. As a result of the collision, Moore's vehicle overturned and became engulfed in flames, the DA's office said. George Moore was heavily intoxicated after a night out in Rockville Center, but nevertheless got behind the wheel of a Mercedes speeding along the Meadowbrook State Parkway and putting countless lives at risk, Donnelly said. The defendant hit the back of an SUV, sending his vehicle into the median, where it flipped and burst into flames. As a sworn law enforcement officer, George Moore should have known the threat he was on the road that night and the damage he could cause. His selfishness and reckless disregard upended the lives of 2 innocent women and landed him on the wrong side of the law. The passenger in Moore's car suffered serious physical injury, including a fracture to her left wrist and a spinal fracture. The driver of the Grand Cherokee suffered injuries to her lower back, left shoulder, and right knee. Moore suffered a broken pelvis, a broken arm, and a broken leg, Donnelly said. After an extensive investigation, it was determined that Moore consumed alcohol at several bars in the Rockville Center area before the crash, Donnelly said. He surrendered to the New York State Police on February 28th. Now you want to hear the true story about this. I'm going to put this up on the screen. And as you can see, Detective Moore resigned 4 days prior to taking this guilty plea. Now, he was a Tier 3 officer, and he's entitled to resign whenever he wants. The problem here is he was apparently never served charges and specs. You get charges and specifications almost immediately concurrent with whatever criminal case you get. You ask any NYPD officer, and the majority of them that somehow got either a bogus arrest or they were involved in something, they get charges and specs concurrently. And then they have to, wait for the criminal trial before they have the trial of, the internal trial. So the charges and specs are missing in this. So Detective Moore apparently was allowed to just leave without ever facing charges and specs. Now, of course, if he pleads whatever the plea agreement is, he might be able to keep his benefits and whatever money he has in his pension, even though he's pleading to a felony or he's pleading to whatever it is, a misdemeanor. But the police department never issued charges and specs. And you say, why? Well, apparently and allegedly, George Moore is the brother-in-law of the former NYPD chief, Rodney Harrison, who was at one time in charge, I believe, of Suffolk County Police Department or Nassau County, one of the two. He was in charge out there. And also, George's mom, Rosetta Duncan Moore, worked with then NYPD, I believe, sergeant in transit, the illustrious mayor of New York, Eric Adams. So you ask yourself, how does this individual not get served NYPD charges? Now, I'm sure there's going to be other New York City Police Department employees watching this saying either they've been in trouble or know someone that got in trouble and said, where are the charges? To this date, there have been no charges ever presented with George Moore. They would have been up on his 58. It would have been obtainable. So what happened? Well, if it's not, Eric Adams, Eddie Caban was in charge at this time, and there was a lot going on under Eddie Caban, wasn't there? The point here is, it looks like the ugly head of cronyism and nepotism has come right through. It's just speared its way to the front. And in the New York City Police Department, it's always not what you know, it's who you know. Discipline, anything, transfers, assignments. It really just goes on cronyism and nepotism. Something that I like to point out, Marlon Bethel points out, Eric Dim points out, and John Macari always point out. And these are the things that need to be fixed, because you can't have a dysfunctional house running things, because that's why you're getting what you're getting. And in this case, it is very bizarre how no charges were ever filed, charges and specifications by the New York City Police Department, yet we have someone who's facing a criminal trial, pleads guilty to, is allowed to just walk off the job, and there's no charges anywhere. Was there ever charges filed? But imagine the poor cop that might have had a bad day, says something discourteous or questionably discourteous to their supervisor, wears white socks, doesn't have a whistle, and gets charges and specifications, and they're getting railroaded right now. Well, how about the police officer that isn't friends with the Consofrito crew and somehow knows someone who may or may not have done something 40 years ago, so to define him as a criminal, and now has criminal association charges, and they're facing charges and specifications? What do these people have to say? They don't know anyone. They don't hang out in different bars or places where all the cronies hang out of Eric Adams and company. So they're just going to get railroaded. And this is what needs to stop. I vehemently oppose this whole system. This system is corrupt. It needs to be abolished. The police commissioner should have no final say in anything. This should go to a completely separate unit, tribunal that has no ties to City Hall, the NYPD. They're just regular judicial appointments, or, they're lawyers, someone that has no ties to anything and just says, yes or no, this is good, this is bad, what's the policy, and they just follow it. Yeah, I know you're Inspector so-and-so, but you deserve to be fired, and that's what's going to happen. No, you don't beat someone over the head and then lie about it. That is illegal. That is actually a crime, in all honesty. But that's what you saw with your own eyes. So just so you know, we're here exposing the truth. But it's really up to you, the voters, especially in New York City, many being low information. Hopefully this is opening your eyes. You're the one that decide what's about to occur next, because there's a mayoral election, there's city council seats up for grabs. Yes, your vote matters. Don't sit home, or you're going to get a lot more of this. And for the police officers that are watching this, and you guys also need to go vote and make all your family vote. Because if you don't vote, this kind of stuff's going to continue. So now we're going to move along. And I mentioned Eric Adams going to Albany. You know, he had his, you know, what do they call the Tin Cup Day, whatever it's called. Well, he went there, and this is from the Gothamist. So, Mayor Eric Adams urged New York State lawmakers to provide the city with more than $1 billion to help fill a looming budget shortfall in the city's program for housing asylum seekers and other migrants. $1 billion. The amount of money Mayor Eric Adams is asking New York State for to help cover migrant costs. Well, Eric, I don't know how to tell you this, but you probably have $1 billion or more in litigation that you're going to be spending. You yourself have pending litigation that somehow the city is funding, which is absolutely illegal. And a lot of this is your own fault. The reason the city doesn't have money is because you're wasting it on litigation and all this City of Yes and all these other projects that maybe financially won't work for the moment. You're trying to rob Peter to pay Paul. And meanwhile, you yourself are a crook. And so are your cronies. And I don't see how $1 billion, I don't know if the state has $1 billion to give you. And the federal government shouldn't be giving you a dime. You want, what was it? You were asking for like $8 billion or something. No, you misused funds yourself. You're no better than the prior mayor who took $800 million to $1 billion in a scam with his wife. You're doing the same thing as the mayor. In fact, you're selling out anything you can. That's the appearance of impropriety with you. That's what the feds are investigating. That's what the state is investigating. Because everywhere you look, there's some kind of impropriety and side hustle that someone tied back to you or your office, or maybe you in general, are involved in. It's really sad to see someone who can't admit that they are the reason for this. And as much as you want to say the government, they picked on me and all this other stuff, there's no evidence of that. And by the way, you were corrupt from your days in the state senate to your days in the Brooklyn Borough president, and now as the mayor. It's always been an appearance of impropriety surrounding you somehow, some way. So $1 billion, a tough ask. I don't know if you're going to get that money, Eric. And I think maybe you're going to need a fiscally conservative mayor to be elected in New York City if you're going to save it. You may get funds federally, probably never enough to cover the disaster that was the migrant shelter crisis. That was, partially also created by Eric Adams himself, inviting these people long before they were shipping them out to New York City. Eric was inviting them in. So let's not forget that whole story. But this is another to be continued. And I don't see how Eric Adams gets $1 billion from Kathy Hochul. Maybe he gets some of the funds, but $1 billion is a tough task and a tall order for New York State taxpayers to be paying into New York City's problems. So now we're going to move on to the next topic. So sticking to Eric Adams, I posted this on X. Conservative influencers had been saying for months Eric Adams' prosecution was for airline ticket upgrades, making it political. Oh, it is actually because he took $10 million of taxpayers' money he now owes, like I stated. So what do I mean? Here's the article by Politico. Eric Adams' 2021 campaign could be on the hook for $10 million. New York City officials indefinitely suspended a deadline for auditing the mayor's initial election effort, a move that could force his campaign to repay millions. This is by Joe Anuta and Jeff Colton of Politico. New York City election officials are raising the stakes in their audit of Mayor Eric Adams' 2021 campaign, a move that could foreshadow the beleaguered mayor being forced to repay $10 million. In a January 16 letter obtained through a Freedom of Information law request, the Campaign Finance Board informed Team Adams it was taking more time to complete an audit of his 2021 election effort after discovering bookkeeping irregularities and learning of an alleged straw donor scheme via the mayor's federal criminal case. In the missive, the board's general counsel doubled down on the possibility Adams would be found in breach of certification, the board's most serious punishment and one that could require Adams to repay the $10.1 million in public matching funds he received during his first run for mayor. He would also be barred from receiving public monies in the future. Because the CFB is investigating the campaign for potential campaign-related fraud and activity that may constitute a breach of certification, you are hereby informed that the deadline for completion of the campaign's final audit is suspended indefinitely. Attorney Joseph Gallagher wrote. Adams' campaign attorney, Vito Pita, said the campaign has done nothing wrong. We will continue to work with the CFB in any way needed to complete its review of the 2021 campaign and post-election audit, he said in a statement. As we have stated again and again, the campaign has always complied and will always comply with the Campaign Finance Act and CFP rules. We are confident that this will be demonstrated clearly at the conclusion of the audit process. The board declined to comment on the original deadline for completing the audit, but typically takes years to pour over mayoral campaign ledgers. A crowded field of candidates has assembled to challenge the mayor ahead of the June Democratic primary, and late last year, the CFB dealt the mayor a serious setback. In December, the board denied the mayor's request for $4.3 million in public matching funds, citing the federal criminal case. In a follow-up letter sent to the campaign, the CFB first raised the possibility of finding Adams in breach of certification. Adams still has some hopes of receiving public funds. In a separate letter dated January 16, the board said the mayor's campaign could petition for reconsideration. Peter declined to comment on whether the campaign has done so, but the mayor has resumed fundraising to make up for the lost cash in an apparent hedge. The sudden cash shortfall comes as low polling numbers and a budding relationship with President Donald Trump have clouded the mayor's path to a second term. Adams has courted the president for months, and the commander-in-chief has openly mused about pardoning the Democratic mayor. Now, Trump's top prosecutors are in talks to potentially drop the case instead. As part of its oversight of candidate fundraising and spending, the board has long suspected Adams of using more bundlers to turn for third-party fundraisers than his team has led on. In a January 15 report, also obtained via a records request, the board flagged a series of donations that may have been raised by intermediary Leon Goldenberg. Goldenberg is CEO of Goldmont Realty and is involved with a number of Jewish organizations, including COJO of Flatbush and Agudat Israel of America. He did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Adams' campaign did not initially report Goldenberg, who is a registered city lobbyist, as bundling contributions. The campaign will now have an opportunity to review and change its disclosures. Adams' team has reported relatively few intermediaries compared to other campaigns, but the campaign made a rare fix last year. Political First reported listing a high-ranking NYPD employee as an intermediary after CFP auditors flagged a series of donations. Yeah, so Eric's in trouble. That's the bottom line here. You read that and you can't say to yourself, is this really about airline ticket upgrades? Really? Someone asked, who was that? Is that Eric Trump that said that? Is there some young Republican, New York young Republican that said that? Let me tell you something. This is a lot more serious than anyone has been led to believe. I read this. I've been in court plenty of times. Lawyers, defense attorneys, civil attorneys, they read this and we all concurred. We all came to the same conclusion. This is a lot more serious than the Turkish airline upgrade. And that whole line sounds like a Steve Bannon induced creation. And that's a guy who's on his own trial in February. So I don't know what to say here other than there's more, because this is the last thing I'm going to show everyone here. Fresh off the presses. As you can see here, there was 3 sealed documents placed in the vault in Eric Adams' case on February 3rd and February 4th. And then February 4th, it was right here, an opinion and order as to Eric Adams' motion for leave to file a bill of particulars. The motion for leave to file a bill of particulars is denied. The clerk of court is respectfully directed to terminate ECF number 72, signed by Judge Dale E. Ho on 2/4/25, entered on the same day. And then there's another thing that happened here. Consent letter motion addressed to Judge Dale E. Ho dated February 4th, 2025, in reply to the SIPA Section 3 Protective Order. Document filed by USA as to Eric Adams. Attachments number 1. Proposed order. SIPA Section 3 Protective Order. Wickstrom Derek. Entered 2/4/2025. I posted this. A motion for a bill of particulars was denied in New York City Mayor Eric Adams' federal case, which involves classified documents regarding national security. It's Eric who asked for a speedy trial when there are millions of documents to review before April 21st. This case is more than just airline ticket upgrades. And so this charade will come to an end sooner or later. In all honesty, how can anyone talk about dropping this case or pardoning this guy? What I believe is going on is there's some kind of communication for a plea agreement. That I suspect is going on. But the fact that there's classified documents involved, and that if you actually read this order, there's a paragraph in there that mentions how Alex Spiro, his own attorney, is not allowed to discuss this document with his client. He could give particulars, not particulars, but generalizations, unless Eric Adams himself, who may know what the document is or whatever is in it, he's got to talk to his attorney. And then he's allowed to discuss the full disclosure on this document. I don't know what to say. That sounds like a mess. And I think, between a speedy trial, there's millions of documents. How does this guy not just try to plea out? Whether it's whatever it is, the walls are just closing in at a rapid rate. There's other investigations waiting behind, and it might be even more serious than this. Although having national security documents, things like that, that's really serious and a lot more than just ticket airline upgrades. Great line by the people that want to get involved with this guy. I think he's politically finished. If anyone tries to throw him a life raft here, you might end up in an indictment worse than him. I just say stay away and let the courts and the jury decide what's going to come next. Unless Eric wants to plea out and step down or whatever it is, whatever the agreement would be. I don't know if he's stepping down, but I can't imagine plea talks are not going on right now because this sounds very troubling. So this has been another edition of the Sal Greco Show. You can tune in Friday. With that being said, I'd like to bid adieu, farewell, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. There's plenty of news to go around, and let's just hope for the best for the taxpayers, and hopefully we can root out corruption together.